Hello, I am Daniel Stahl, and I'm here to talk about how we've operationalized machine learning at Regions Bank. So I am responsible for our data engineering team, and that encompasses a couple of different areas. One is the maintenance and administration of our on-premise data assets. Another is in taking those source system data assets and loading them into our data lake environment. I have another team that's responsible for taking that data and curating it into a way that is usable for downstream consumption. And finally, and most importantly for this talk, I have a team that's responsible for the machine learning operations to enable our data scientists. When I use the term a factory approach for MLOps, I really mean taking a bespoke and ad hoc process for productionalizing and promoting models and applying a assembly line approach where we have a consistent way to take those models and promote them into an environment. So abstracting away all the technical or unique details of each model and providing a framework for which we can deliver really any type of model into a production environment. So I'll be going a little bit more into that. I'll also be going a little bit into what we're looking for in the future. So a lot of financial institutions these days are making a cloud journey. So I'll touch a little bit on what our future state looks like, not just what we've done in the past. Before moving on, a little bit about Regions. So Regions is a top 30 U.S. bank by asset size. We're primarily in the Southeast. We are Alabama's only Fortune 500 company, and we have an outsized influence on the state's economy. And we're also very popular with our customers. We're always at or near the top of any organization survey in our peer group. One of the ways that we can continue to be that customer-focused company is by using data and analytics to drive a very personalized approach for our customers. So when I think about what it takes to make a successful machine learning pipeline or a machine learning operations environment, there's really three things that we try to keep in mind. The first is, do we get the organization right? Do we have the right organizational structure? Do we have the right alignment? Do we have the right ownership? And I'll dive a little bit into that in the next couple slides. Technology, this one's an obvious one. Do we have the right tools in place to enable the things that we need to do from a machine learning perspective? And finally, discipline. Do we have that mindset, and are we consistent in applying that mindset? What are the things that it takes to create a successful team in order to enable some of these things? Going right into the organization. So I mentioned that I'm going to be talking about the past, and I'll be talking about the future. One of the things that we've been doing in the past is we've had separate teams for each of these various components of a data pipeline. So we've had an ingestion team using certain tools. We've had a transformation team, which takes those raw data sources and transforms them into something that's a little bit more usable for downstream users. Then finally, we have the downstream consumers, data scientists, reporting teams, et cetera. And these teams, all these teams use very different tooling. It's really hard to have the right consistent governance pane across. And whenever there's an inevitable problem in the handoffs, there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming because no one team has responsibility for the entire pipeline. And so we've thought about how we're going to think about this in the future. And part of it is taking a data mesh approach. Data mesh is kind of a hot topic in the news today, but we're really trying to enable that type of an approach. And one of the things that we've been thinking about with that is aligning the organization to have these horizontal teams that deliver a data contract in the data mesh environment. So that means that we have a shared data platform environment to enable a single governance pane. And within that environment, we have horizontal teams that are responsible for their own data assets and deliverables. And a data contract here is really important. So when I think about a data contract, I think about a augmented, if you will, REST API specification. So if you think about a REST API, you often have a Swagger doc that defines that API, and then you can version that API over time. Similarly, from a data contract perspective, we're thinking about specifying our schemas, yes, but also thinking about things like how frequent is this data? How fresh is this data? What are the steps that have to be taken in the event that something does break? What's the SLA? What are the steps that happen when that SLA or if that SLA ever gets broken? And we like that metadata to be something that is relevant and able to be used by our downstream users. One of the other things that we're thinking about is versioning our data assets. So in REST API, it's pretty straightforward to version. You just host a new Docker pod or Kubernetes pod, if you will, for another version of your API. It's a little bit more complex in the data world because you do have to store different versions of data, and storage isn't free. You might also have to run some additional pipelines to make that versioning happen, and compute's really not free. It's quite expensive. But we're finding that the most expensive thing is to have an organization that's just too static and too afraid to change because they don't have a good change management process for their data pipelines. Moving on to the technology, and I won't focus too much on this slide. There's a lot of text here, but essentially the things that you would expect, right? We need to enable machine learning pipelines by having good storage, good compute, an environment that enables engineers and developers, and of course the typical CI/CD type approaches that we would use to take our models into production. Diving deeper into how we've actually implemented this, though. So when we started this journey about 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't have any bespoke ML ops tooling. And I know there's a lot of debates. There's probably been a debate since 4 or 5 years ago, if not before. And it continues to this day about whether ML ops is an extension of DevOps or whether they're really two separate disciplines. I fall cleanly on the ML ops as an extension to DevOps side of that argument. And in fact, we didn't have much of a choice when we first started, because when we first started, we only had the DevOps tooling available. So we used at that time Bitbucket, Bamboo, which is an Atlassian product for the CI/CD part. And the reason we were able to get away with this is because we have a conceptual map between what ML is and what traditional software development is. So ML experimentation is akin conceptually to software development. Machine learning training as akin conceptually to software compilation. Both software engineering and machine learning end up with these objects, whether it be a binary or a model object using, say, Onyx or a pickle, that can then be used to in a REST API or some other microservice, or even in batch. So we developed the scaffolding to enable the CI/CD process. We also included developer tools. So we had a very basic CLI tool called Create Data Product, and data scientists would go in when they wanted to make a new project, and they would type in Create Data Product. There'd be a few questions that they would put into the CLI tool, and it would scaffold a structure for their code in such a way that they would know where to put their Python code that had the CI/CD templates already built out. That had things like automatically running unit tests, so they didn't have to worry about that. Example unit tests, so they knew kind of where to edit and how to edit those. And in the end, would actually auto package and deploy these data products into our local PyPy registry. So in the end, you could actually pip install a model and have it run in any anywhere that Python could run. Model observability was something that we had to add on. So at the very beginning of this whole thing, we had Spark and we had DevOps tools, but there were some gaps at that point. So model monitoring and observability was ad hoc and per model. We really felt like we needed a place to have a single pane of glass into how our models were performing. And so our host Y Labs really have solved that for us, even in our legacy environments, using their YLogs library to do a lot of that aggregation and monitoring directly on top of our Spark pipelines. So that's how we've done it in the past and really how we currently do it. But I want to pivot and talk about how we're going to do this in the future. So with our cloud migration and replatforming the cloud environment, we're actually leaning even more into using the conceptual map of CI/CD and ML ops. So we're going to be using GitHub Actions, or we're in the process of operationalizing GitHub Actions, which we're using for CI/CD, but it's actually far more than just that. It's a general purpose job runner, workflow orchestrator. We use it for things like improved developer automation. And I really actually want to call out another conceptual map that really helps me think about this. So functional programming has become fairly popular in recent years. And what that it does is it says every function that you create needs to be a deterministic, the output needs to be deterministic given the inputs. So it doesn't have a dependency that's not explicitly provided to that function. And when I think about our code repos, I think about that kind of concept where everything that you need in order to train, deploy, monitor your models are all inside a single repository. You don't need to go anywhere else to make anything happen. Other things that we use GitHub for, code coverage percentage. We auto bump versioning. We auto create pre-releases. We have hooks to set up for notifying internal stakeholders of things that are happening with our models. So a lot of automation that's just built into that platform that we've been building out. We're also leaning into Snowflake and Snowpark. So one of the things that we really found troublesome about our existing process was that there were just so many different places to go. You had to go to Bitbucket, you had to go to our on-premise data lake, you had to go to Bamboo, and we were trying to simplify that whole approach. It's interesting. And we also had such a dependency on Spark that a lot of the algorithms that are out there didn't have a Spark integration. And so our data scientists were always asking for, using the ability to use some of the newer Python tools, and we just weren't able to provide that to them in our Spark environment. But we're really leaning into Snowpark. So this is a very new offering from Snowflake, but it essentially allows you to run arbitrary Python code within the Snowflake environment, which allows us to do large-scale model training directly within Snowflake, so not having to bring our data out from Snowflake into any other tool in order to run these things. And we provided some interesting automation around things like MLflow integrated with Snowflake. Finally, Melcore is our in-house data development platform that we're building on top of the cloud. So a lot of open source frameworks that we're merging together, Jupyter Hub, the aforementioned MLflow. And Melcore is if you know anything about Lord of the Rings, is actually a name for Morgoth. This was pointed out to me after someone on my team had suggested using Melcore, and I was like, yeah, we'll keep it. But I also like the fact that it does sound like a malapropism for ML Core. So it's a really, I think, a clever name that we're going to be using for our in-house development platform. Finally, talking about discipline, these practices and behaviors that we really want to instill. First, just some high-level developmental practices. We want to have a very strong sense of ownership. So if you write some code, you better be willing to maintain that code. And you should, for the sake of your future self, you should be able to write testable, maintainable, clean code. I mentioned already the functional programming as a mental model for infrastructure as code, really leaning into that. Everything is code. Have everything that is needed for deployment in a single environment. And finally, this is table stakes at this point, but we have to think about security, obfuscation, privacy up front. We never put it on, slap it on at the end. It's always a consideration with everything that we do. Another thing that we like to do is we do evangelism to the rest of the bank, as well as to data scientists and others who are leveraging our platform. So we have office hours every 2 weeks where we just have people come in and ask questions. And if they have questions, concerns, things that block them, we can help dive into those issues. And it helps us understand what needs there are and what pain points there are. And it helps us also unblock folks who are using our tools. Roadshows and demos. So we have a lot of these, but the one I want to highlight is our annual Data Science Day. And so this is an opportunity for us to give demos, to give talks. We sometimes bring in external speakers to go over some of the things that we've done in the past year and what we are intending to do in the next year. So these are some of the pictures that you see up there from our last Data Science Day, where we would have race cars that were racing each other, where data scientists were using these race cars or programming these race cars to be able to go around a track. And on the right there is a peer of mine and one of her reports who are dressed as Obi-Wan and Leia to give one of their presentations. Which really goes into our attitude. So one of Region's core values is have fun, and I think we really embody that. We have a lot of fun in the things that we do. We're very collegial, collaborative. We have a very can-do attitude where we are always looking for innovative ways to solve problems and do it in a way that brings everyone along for the ride. So that concludes my presentation today. Again, the big thing is the concepts we always keep in mind. How do we make sure that the organization is set up correctly? How do we make sure that we have the right tools and technology? And then finally, we have the right mindset and discipline. And I think we've used all three of those to deliver an excellent MLOps platform in the past, and we're continuing to deliver excellence on this in the future. So with that, I'll stop for any questions.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for winging the presentation without the slides. You are incredibly animated, so we didn't miss a ton, and I truly admire your ability to just, present without the slide props. The viewers really loved the Melkor name. Amazing, and I think somebody super cleverly pointed out that it sounds like ML Core as well. Was that intentional?
It was not, but we do like having things that start with M and have L in them just to get that ML in there. It's funny, the person who suggested it on my team is actually one of the people who is the least knowledgeable about ML, I would say. He's very knowledgeable about a bunch of other things, but I think it was a happy accident.
I love it. I love it. I mean, your team sounds like you have the most fun and also are very, very effective. One of the questions that comes up from the audience is, how's your team organized? I mean, how, it's always a challenge, especially when you're operating within a fairly well-established organization like a big bank. How do you bring the machine learning practitioners and kind of integrate them into various aspects of the bank's operations and make sure they're effective?
That's a great question. So my boss is our chief data and analytics officer, and he came in about 4 or 5 years ago now. And his vision was to have what he termed data products, which were really end-to-end solutions that had an ML or data component, but delivered something of value to our internal customers. So one of our first data products was a application that helped our relationship managers identify and prioritize calling their clients. So the client looked like they might be about to leave the bank because we saw their relationship was they're moving some things out, like we would prioritize that, for example. And that has just been a phenomenal boon to the relationship managers, who now know day one, like the first time they start their day, they're able to prioritize and see who they need to call next instead of trying to dig through a bunch of data to find that. So the way that we're organized is really using that data product mindset and having a staff of data product partners, we call them. They're really product owners for those data products, and they act as internal consultants. So they go to our internal customers, they attend their staff meetings, they identify the pain points that they think can get addressed by data, and then it's their job to sell our services, if you will, to those internal customers. And that model has worked really well. It means that we find really high value tasks to tackle. It means that we are relevant to the things that are needed at the top of the house. So that really helps with the alignment problem that I often see at other organizations from a data science perspective.
That's amazing. And it sounds like you're like literally impacting the day-to-day operations at the bank with the products, with the data products that you're developing. That's incredible. Another question that comes again from the audience, I think Octave is asking, you're in a highly regulated industry and privacy is of top importance. How do you ensure data privacy when you're working with platforms like GitHub, for instance? That's a great question. So we have a phenomenal architecture team. We have a phenomenal InfoSec team. One of the ways that we've done this is the GitHub, and I'm going to get really tactical here. GitHub has a concept of custom runners that you can run on your own VPC, and then GitHub becomes the orchestrator essentially. So nothing actually, from a data perspective, everything's staying in our
approved environments. And then all GitHub does is have our code, but no data.
That's amazing. That's a really good setup, and kudos to the architecture team. And of course, because we are wrapped up in the quite a hype around large language models and generative AI, of course, there's a question about the GitHub Copilot. Have you thought about giving it a use? How do you feel about it?
I've given it a lot of thought. I think that can really be an enabler for, well, really everyone at Regions who does any kind of coding. So yes, we've given it thought. I think there is going to be some concerns around privacy and security with Copilot, so that we'll have to work through, but it's definitely on our radar.
Amazing. And kind of as a dovetail question for me, when I was chatting with Andrew earlier, we were discussing, whether enterprises are already considering how they would use, the latest advancements in generative AI. I'm curious, what's Region's perspective? Are there any specific use cases that you're particularly excited about kind of starting up on with some of these latest large language models or image generation models?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Copilot's a big one. That's something that's not customer facing, so we don't have to have the same scrutiny on that we would if we created a chat bot that our customers could interact with. Another one is an internal knowledge repository. So instead of having to use tribal knowledge to find where you're going within the organization, you can actually just call up a chat bot and have it using these large language models that are then hopefully trained on our internal data or transfer learned on our internal data, can then kind of answer those questions a lot more quickly. So definitely some applications there potentially, especially if as new associates are onboarding to get familiar with the different systems that we have here at Region.
Oh yeah, the company's knowledge bases are some of the most fun to navigate, especially when you're just joining and you're like looking through the company wiki, and every question yields like 20,000 pages and you don't know which one to start reading. I would say last question from the audience, Brendan is asking, do you worry about potential bad actors attacking your ML algorithms directly?
That's an interesting question. I think as we have, so in the past, we've had most of our algorithms be internal focused. So things like recommendations for our relationship managers, right? As we have more and more use cases where we expose machine learning to the general public or through a device to our customers, there's definitely more opportunity for bad actors, and it's something that we're going to have to keep in mind.
Excellent. Well, a lot of work has been accomplished and there's a lot to be done yet. So I'm really excited to see the innovation that's going to come out of your team. And hopefully one day, maybe I'll sneak into those data science days because they sound so fun.
We'd love to have you. Yes.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate you sticking with it and going through the talk. It was really exciting to hear how you guys are productionalizing machine learning at Regions, and have the fantastic rest of your day.
Yes, thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you, Daniel.